Today's guest is an entrepreneur, mentor, and the founder of the world's fastest growing mental wellbeing organisation. Over the past 4 years, he has been featured in 150 mainstream publications and impacted more than 8 million lives. Today, he's going to share with you new insights, ideas, and information to launch a global movement. Would you please help me welcome our good friend, Glenn Marsden? Welcome.
Thank you very much, and what an honour to be in the privilege of somebody who's done so much himself. So thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Well, they say birds of a feather flock together. And I once heard one of my friends from Manchester. He said, Daniel, I can't do the accent, but he said it. I just got to do it without the accent. He said, if you spend time with 5 idiots, you'll become the 6th. But if you spend time with 5 intelligent people, you'll become the 6th. And I'm a big believer of, meeting the right people and spending time with people who are on that same journey. I think it's so important.
Your friend sounds very smart from Manchester. That's where I'm from.
Okay. The other thing that he tells me, he says, how can a man with no brain earn more money than a brain surgeon? I love that. I love that Manchurian wit and charm. Now, in the past, you were badly affected by body dysmorphia. So what's body dysmorphia and how did it impact you?
Yeah, I suppose if we're taking it back 6-7 years ago, my whole premise with body dysmorphia came from working in and around health and fitness. I was in it since I left college, went to university, got to about my 30s. I was running clubs in Sydney, Australia, went to New Zealand, running clubs there. And I suppose when I turned 30, in my head, the old narratives that we tell ourselves, as an Englishman especially, turning 30, I should be settled down. I got my first child. We got the house. And all of a sudden, I was comparing myself to all these people living in Bondi Beach, and we know a lot of people in Sydney. You see people and they're very good looking people and their bodies look like they've just walked off a catwalk or a magazine. And I suppose in and around it, consistently 24/7, I started comparing myself. And what happened with that is I took it really deep and really dark through social media, just constantly, like the algorithm, it brings you more of what you literally don't want to see, but that's what it's pertaining to be. And it got to a point where we moved ourselves from Sydney. We had our first child. We couldn't find childcare in Sydney. So we moved to Thailand where my wife was originally born. She grew up in Florida, came to Australia. We met each other. It was either going to the UK or going to Thailand. As you can imagine, the British guy in me, I was like, I'm going somewhere hot. Went to Thailand, but I suppose it was my demise. So with a different culture, not working at the beginning, I suppose what started comparing myself, when it comes to body dysmorphia, there's 2 types. It's obviously seeing yourself with a perceived flaw. With me, I was obsessed looking in the mirror to the point I wanted this big aesthetic chest and these arms, being in the health and fitness industry. And I suppose from being in the mirror 2 to 3 minutes, it got to the darkest spots of 2 to 3 hours. Just picking myself apart, seemingly on the external. Prior to going to Thailand, I was on stage. So I was in front of hundreds of people. I was teaching fitness classes. I went to Thailand. I continued that. So anybody from an external point of view who didn't understand it, even my wife at the time, would have thought, you've got this guy who's on stage, he's teaching, he's loving life. He gets off stage, he's in the mirror for 2 to 3 hours. Come on, that's a little bit narcissistic. However, dealing with it and how powerful your brain can be in the negative took me to such a dark place that I didn't actually know how I was going to get out of it. And as a guy, I hid it. I was giving little triggers to people to see if they spotted it in me, but nobody was. And then my worst stage probably got to the point where we'd got our first child, like I said, and my wife sat me down one day and she said, you either speak to somebody about it or it's going to break our marriage down. And that was the first time as a guy that I broke down. And we went to see somebody in Thailand, and this is one of my big things is if you see somebody and it doesn't initially work, keep going. Because I saw a general practitioner, and as we know, a general practitioner, general medicine, not specifically aimed. And in Thailand, because they're so hip up on education rather than aesthetics, and there's a small population that obviously trains like everywhere else does in the Western world, but he didn't understand it. I actually Googled body dysmorphia and saw the symptoms. And when I said it to the doctor, he said, is it some form of OCD? So to me, as a guy who finally expressed his emotions, who shared his vulnerability, for a doctor to turn around and say, I can't see anything wrong with you, is it in your head? It shut me down again. But by the grace of God, a few weeks later, we actually got an email, and I say the grace of God because we got an email from Sydney saying we've got 5 days in childcare for my son. We moved back. It eased a little bit. I got in my environment with people. I shared it a little bit. And then a personal trainer actually overheard me, put me in contact with a psychologist he knew. He once dealt with body dysmorphia as well. And that kind of spurred this conversation. And as it went and I spoke about it, the amount of guys that came up, and I spotted it within them. As I said, there's 2 types. You're either obsessed looking at perceived flaws, or you can't look at yourself. Being in the gym environment, because I'm an extrovert and I love being around people, I stayed in the industry, but removed myself from looking at social media and turned it off. But I started noticing when people weren't checking their form out in the mirror, and it had initiated a conversation like, why aren't you looking at yourself? I can't stand myself. I can't. So it opened this whole catalyst towards helping people change their narrative and getting them help. And yeah, 6-7 years ago now.
It's such a fascinating area. You know, when you mentioned body dysmorphia on your website, I had to Google it as well. And I hadn't heard of it. And I've worked with a lot of people over the years, but I've never heard of it put like that. And one of the first things that I found when I Googled it today was somebody standing in front of the mirror, and their reflection was very different to their perception.
Yeah.
It was 2 different things. And I started to draw this connection as you've been talking. I was invited into a home many years ago. And when I went into the home, it looked normal to me until I realised that in the home, all the mirrors had been covered with newspaper. And I thought, well, maybe it was just in this area of the house. And so I went to the other bathroom and those mirrors were covered up, and I went to the other bathroom, and then the one in the hallway had also been covered up. And I looked at it and I thought, what is this? You know, you try not to label it, but you're getting curious. I'm like, what is this? And then this person who invited me to their home, they were invited into my home. And they were using the bathroom, and I walked past the bathroom and I noticed the bathroom light was off. Now, this bathroom had no window, so it would have been pitch black in there. So I flicked on the light and I heard this big scream, don't turn on the light. And I thought, oh, that's a little bit different. You know, I think you'd want the light on. Maybe you want to check what's on the on the paper, or you want to make sure you've washed your hands properly, or you've got nothing in your teeth. And so when the person came out, I said, hey, there's a bit of connection I've made here. When I went to your home, you covered up all the mirrors with newspaper, and now you're in my home using my bathroom. It's pitch black in there. What's going on? And he said, I can't stand the look at myself in the mirror. And it's kind of a little bit of a pattern I see here. He had covered up the mirrors and he couldn't handle the look of himself. And there was always imperfections. But he had also come from the fitness industry. And he had been a trainer. And I'm just drawing a pattern here, because he was so obsessed with his body as a trainer. And then as he started to lose his shape, he couldn't stand the look of himself in the mirror, and he'd gone to those extremes. So for somebody who's becoming more problem aware with the body dysmorphia, what would some of those habits or behaviours be early on that they could start to notice in themselves? You know, what were some of those early things that you started to notice?
So for myself, it was this, like I was saying before, I was obsessed with trying to get this aesthetic chest and big arms. So I was training around a lot of big guys. Now, I wasn't as naive as to think there wasn't additional supplementation with some people. But when you are
wasn't a boosting.
No, it wasn't a boosting. But when you are hanging around and calling these people good friends, you would think that the truth would come out. And that's where it can start playing with your head. So for somebody who is clued up on health, wellness, physiology, and the makeup of the body, to understand that people will be putting supplementation, but then at the same time, really good friends essentially are lying to you and saying, no, it's not this. It does play with your head. So the early trigger points for me were, I would literally notice myself checking myself out and excusing myself to go to the bathroom often to look in the mirror. And then it was only after several months, my wife would start noticing it and going, you're drinking a lot of water, you're going to the bathroom quite a lot. And I'd make excuses for it. And then if I can give the best example of the way that I worked, and someone once did a video of this short film on body dysmorphia. Now, there was a guy, again, the preliminary fitness industry. He was going to the gym. He was looking at all these aesthetic bodies and comparing himself first and foremost. He was walking out of the door. He caught sight of himself in the mirror. He went out the door. 2 seconds later, he'd come back in. He'd put his bag on the floor. He'd take his top off. He'd be judging himself, looking at himself in the mirror, and he'd end up not going. That was me. So those early trigger points were like 2 to 3 minutes, checking myself, see if anything had changed, turning around, having a look, and then it just got deeper and deeper. It literally was impending in every area of my life. I would be working, when I got to Thailand, I was running a sales department in a CrossFit gym. So I continued in the industry, and I found myself just disappearing into the bathroom for a long time, just constantly checking myself. But the trigger points on the other end of the spectrum, like you said, with the person that you noticed those patterns, and I started picking patterns and having the discernment to help people later on, was that they would hide away. So anyone in the gym would literally go on any machine that is facing the wall or away from the mirror, or at home they'd be covering it, like you say, with a newspaper, or they'd remove all the mirrors in the house.
Fascinating. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're experiencing some of these early stages, if you're constantly looking at yourself in the mirror and you know it's not vanity and it could be something else, then make sure you start to look deeper into body dysmorphia. And it's not a conversation that I've ever had before, Glenn. You know, I'm almost 42 and I've never had that conversation before. So I'm sure there's millions of other people out there who, even if these patterns were taking place in their inner circle inside their homes, they may not even notice it.
Yes, I mean, one of the biggest things I will say is when it first came out, and I essentially diagnosed myself, I say, and then got confirmed by a psychologist when I was back in Australia, the common theme between it is a lot of people do not know the term body dysmorphia. But when I started speaking openly about it within the fitness profession, and then when I was doing more talking with what I've done with my organization, people would pull me to the side and they'd be like, oh, I think I might have that, you know. Like I check myself in the mirror a bit too often and I count my calories, and it is a form of, like, obviously an eating disorder in such a way that you're consumed. So it is like OCD, you're repeating patterns and you start telling you things in your head. And I suppose if you do not seek help and you do not have these conversations, so first and foremost, I just want to say thank you on behalf of noticing those patterns with your friend, because if you do notice these patterns in people, if you pay attention when things are out of habit or character.
It was such a different one because there was no established pattern in the mind. It was something that I was learning on the fly. And it was only that I cared about him that I paid attention to it. And I was like, there's got to be something behind this. And it is hard to bring up these things with friends, because sometimes we don't want to overstep the boundaries. And sometimes addressing our friends on these topics can be one of the hardest things, because sometimes if you've seen them and they haven't identified it in themselves, they can become very sensitive to it. And then they choose not to do much about it. Now, I guess this body dysmorphia comes into the field of mindset, personal well-being, mental health, and you're a big advocate in the field. And it sounds like as a individual, you've had a lot of pain yourself here, and you've gone out and you've found solutions, and you've been able to overcome some of those inner obstacles. And you've gone on to found one of the world's fastest growing mental well-being organisations, which is called IPC Global. So what's IPC Global all about, and how are you having an impact in the community?
Yes, so IPC Global, we shortened the name because it is essentially started as the Imperfect campaign. So that stemmed from my story. And now it does go a little bit deeper, because 4 years ago, the whole premise behind it when it started was my big attributor was social media, which in the entrepreneurship world, anything can be an accumulative thing where we're comparing, competing or judging within other people. That's what I was doing with my body. So I actually turned it off. Now, I also do photography on the side. So as you can imagine, when I had my first child, there was a lot of images that I was posting on my Facebook, my socials for people back home, family. So I had to turn it back on to get some pictures, images of my child to send to family members for my wife and everything. And she literally got me back on social media. And there was an old friend back from the UK, bearing in mind I've not been back at the time for like 17 years. You grow away from people. But there was a friend who I used to train with, again, primarily back in the gym, and he passed away. Everybody was posting, so sorry to hear this, RIP. So I started digging and like, okay, I'm looking at his social media, there's holidays, there's cars, there's career, like he's got a little boy himself, he's got a wife presumably, or a partner. As I said, I've not been in touch for years. And there was no build-up, there was no illness that I could see, cancer or anything. So I reached out to a couple of old friends and I said, what happened? He took his life. So that's how deep it went. And the whole thing for me was, I came across a video one day that his partner had put on, and it was a montage with music of their life together and an interlude of him and his little boy. And he was rocking his little boy and he was kissing and cuddling him. And to me, that just hit me, because for somebody being in a dark space, for a parent to have to sit their child down and say that mum or daddy's not coming home, broke my heart. So the passion combined with that got me opening these conversations with people. And I suppose it was a conversation when I was doing a photo shoot with, being from Australia, home and away, he's called Dan Ewing. And we was talking about social media and my issues. And he said, you know what though, like we are all imperfect. And the more we can embrace our flaws in the way that God made us, we would all be happier. But societal expectations, environments, we have to think this, that, and the other. And it got me thinking, the more conversations I had, the more people talked about suicide and who they'd lost, and people had lost more people to suicide than cancer. And I started researching, and I was like, you know what? In Australia, nothing against it, but there was a huge campaign, presumably hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on a little old lady with a bunch of flowers. And I looked into it. First and foremost, I was like, people are time poor. They're going to walk straight past it and not essentially think, oh, a little old lady, what's that about? Oh, suicide, she lost her husband. Second of all, you're cutting a whole generation of the youngsters because that stigma is there with us. And I was like, there needs to be something. Bearing in mind, from fitness, I didn't have resources, I didn't know PR, I didn't know marketing. I thought, how am I going to do this? And literally, I utilized social media as a way, as its intended purpose, to reach out to people. I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to pick up this. My premise is I want to utilize photography. So if anyone can see in the background, you've got like some of the biggest names in Australia. And I reached out, they didn't know me. And I was like, look, you don't know me from Adam. I was like, this is what I want to do. I reached out to all the organizations, got thank you, but no thank you. Presumably there's a lot of advocates. And you know what? I spoke from the heart. I told them my story. I own my truth, and I was like, look, I ain't got resources. I ain't got all the fancy crap. I want to hear your story, but I think we need to go deeper because everybody always sees celebrities and corporate leaders talk about mental health, but they're still in a studio. They've still got the highlights. And I was like,
With good lighting and
with
good
good lighting.
microphones and those nice angles.
Exactly. So I literally turned around and said, look, do you mind me shooting you in a safe environment that's not triggering, but I need you to go back into, whether it's a piece of music or a diarized piece that you wrote at the time that you struggled, and I just want to shoot around you. And these pivotal little moments, like if anyone goes to the campaign and you'll see a single tear dropping, and people started resonating with those images, because first there was like Rebecca Gibney, one of the biggest names in Australia. There was like, oh, what's this about? She got a new film. Why does she not look like beautified? They go into it. It was like the top of the funnel system. If you think about it, the strategy. We've caught the attention. We've got all these people now that people recognize, not just celebrities, but corporate leaders, people in construction, everything that people would look at, industry specific, just sharing their story. And it took off from there. Within 12 months, went international.
Phenomenal. And it is one of these taboo topics, isn't it? You know, it's happening. We know it's happening to people, but they refuse to talk about it. And I believe that, you know, celebrities and influencers can play a big role. And what I've found very therapeutic over the past couple of months is watching the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. I think a lot of people who have watched this start to realise I've been in relationships with this behaviour. I thought it was me the whole time, but I start to realise that there was somebody else's behaviour triggering mine. And when we see it as raw as that, and I'm thinking about how raw your approach is to the rawness of the courtroom, you get to see that real emotion, which is very different from a constructed one. And we saw a couple of those on the in the witness box. So this is a huge impact, and I know that there's a lot of internal obstacles for entrepreneurs. A lot of entrepreneurs are trying to succeed. Like you mentioned, they hit their 30s, they're trying to raise their families, they're trying to create financial stability. Some people are still trying to please their parents and their bosses. What are some of the big things that are preventing entrepreneurs from having a bigger impact?
See, I think it all comes down to, I always talk about changing this narrative in the head, because I have worked with some entrepreneurs in terms of whether it be in the entertainment industry, corporate industry, and it does go back to those those narratives that they're telling in the head. They're competing, they're comparing, or they're judging. If people are honest and they step forward into their truths, it's either one of the three things. They're judging themselves against all these people that they're seeing, thinking that these people are so far ahead of them that they're never going to catch up. However, everyone's on their own journey. What's meant for me is meant for me, and what's meant for you is for you. When it comes to comparison, I did it with my body. However, in the entrepreneurship world, we see there comes this comparison syndrome where it's like, again, everyone's doing better than me. I need to compete. I need to keep up. So compare, compete, and judgment, they're stuck in old narratives that something traumatic has either come from their past or it has built up through societal expectations. And these days, as we know, it comes to, I can make you 6-7 figures within 4 weeks. And if you're not making it within 4 weeks, you're a failure. But yet a huge commonality when I talk to people and I get to the root problems is one of those three things. And the end of the day is, you want to look at patterns. And I always say it always comes to patterns. What you notice with your friend, what I notice with people, patterns all the time. There are very successful people who have built generational wealth. They have built sustainable businesses, monetized several companies, multi-million-dollar companies. They're all saying the same thing. The exact opposite to what this marketing's saying these days with these youngsters saying, I can make 6-7 figures within 4 weeks. They're all saying it takes you at least 5, 10, 20 years to become this overnight success. Because not only do you have to work through those trigger points and those patterns that have kept you in these cycles, you have to move forward in putting one foot in front of the other, knowing that you're going to become the person that you've always wanted to, which in turn is leadership. You need to build the leadership skills, you need business acumen, because I'll tell you something, when it came to me, I run health clubs. I didn't know how to take something international. I didn't know anything about press. I didn't know anything about networks, dealing with producers, dealing with celebrities, dealing with management. And everyone always goes, how did you get all your press? How much money have you paid for all these influence? I was like, $0 because I didn't have the resources. So I go on some of the biggest business podcasts and they're like, you spent $0 and you've got people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and all these big names. I'm like, I built relationships. So if there's anyone there thinking that they can't do this, I would say, and it is never from a place of ego, but I'd say there's this guy from Yorkshire, knew nobody, moved to Sydney, Australia, went through the depth of his despair himself, lost a friend, knew how powerful your mind can be to take you into such a dark space. If your mind can take you into such a dark space, if you reverse that, it can take you into such an empowered space to become the leader that you were always born to be. But we need to uncover the patterns, which you do a lot of the time with all the people that you work with and what you essentially do through these podcasts. But it really is, it's owning your truth. If you step in and surrender and stop trying to control things and actually embrace those imperfections, you will know you're going to attract your people along the way, because these people that are going 6-7 figures and they're carbon copies of the next one, like you can tell, I call it manipulative marketing. It's been there for years, but you can see patterns in it all. And I'm just like, I say to some of them who I actually know, I'm like, who are you attracting though? Like, so you talk about, I'm making 6-7 figures. Everything you do is led by wealth to highlight this perpetual lifestyle that you're killing it. And the next minute, you're suddenly asking for help. So you're putting yourself in a place that is detrimental to your mental health because you didn't ask for help because you've lied. And now, like, start from the basics. Opportunities come from people. Build relationships with people.
I love what you said there. Comparing, competing, and judging. And I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we've done that not just in business, but in our relationships. I know in business, I've compared my business to others, and it didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse about myself. I have even competed, and I've looked at other businesses and I thought to myself, I want their customers. And then I won them and I got their customers and I thought, oh my gosh, I actually don't want them. Go back to them and ruin somebody else's life. And I think we're very quick to judge. And one of the things I learned many years ago when I first got into sales was that people have a confirmation bias. And within the first 4 seconds, they pass a judgment on you. And it's not about us. But within 30 seconds, they have that confirmation bias and they quickly go back through all their life history in that 30 seconds and just reconfirm the judgment they've passed on you. Yep. And I think we've got to become more aware of our biases. And if we can do that, we can then bypass that judgment. Now, to take a business global, to have this big impact. And I know a lot of people who are following me, they desperately want to make an impact. They really want to make an impact. But what are some of the realities that we have to accept when it comes to making an impact? What are some of the realities that we've just got to accept as part of the process?
It's bloody hard. The truth is, it's hard. This has been one of the most single-handedly best things I've ever done, and the blessings and the opportunities have come. However, on the flip side, it's been one of the hardest. You have to literally be shaken of everything you literally know about business, about yourself, to get those relationships built. Successful people see through BS, excuse the language, but they see through it. So that's why I always say, be yourself, be honest, be truthful. I've sat in front of multi-millionaires, billionaires now, and one of the commonalities they say to me is when they ask me about everything, I will literally say that. I will go, this has been one of the hardest things. There has been times when I've been helping everybody else and I've been in the bathroom at home, knowing that I can't afford to get my kids something if it wasn't for my wife. I've emptied my pockets. And on the flip side, you can see all this press, you can see all this, you can see the celebrities. I'll get people reaching out, or I did in the past. Glenn, can you connect me with this? Glenn, can you do this? Glenn, can you do this? So then it tests your character, because you're being attacked if you don't do what somebody wants. So there's a lot of internal processing and a lot of things you have to work out to become who you really need to be a leader. I think people think, or when they see the IPC and they see all this and they'll see me doing this, this and this, I'm very transparent and honest in the fact that I've emptied my pockets, I've been used, I've been manipulated. But if I didn't have gone through those, I wouldn't be who I am today to actually see where I am. And it sounds cheesy and cliche where people say, enjoy the process. But it's only when you've got through those parts, can you look back and say, that was actually a blessing and I've learned it, because now I can say no, I can work through those trigger points, the boundaries, everything. But one of the things that I would say to anybody listening in terms of if you are making those preliminary judgments on other people is really do your due diligence and look into the background of them. So before I came on your show, I knew of you and I looked into your background, but if I didn't have looked into your story and I just saw the external things, I'd be like, oh, what does he know about going through hardship? Whereas I would say to anyone, look into someone's story, whether they've gone through trauma, abuse, anything, and then when you look at their socials and they're living a high life and they're getting everything, you clap the bloody loudest for them because they deserve it. And that's when you can change that mentality from being the martyr mentality of going me, which is a low vibrational frequency, to a high with gratitude and clapping, and you're going to attract the right people. And you're going to, like, everyone concentrates on the money. If you want to be a leader and make an impact in this world, that's the last thing you need to think of. Yeah, you need it for sustainability, but how are you going to actually create an impact? Like, you can't, for 2 years, I didn't make nothing with IPC. And this is the thing. I was battling in my head going, oh, this is mental well-being. What are people going to think if I'm making money with it? Everyone was going, are you a charity? Are you non-for-profit? Are you for-profit? I got with a lawyer to find out the difference and found out a lot of things about charities behind the scenes. And I was like, hold on a minute. I actually want to be an organization where we go to organizations, charge them so we can give back to the people that can't afford it. That was a process as well. So if you truly want to make an impact and become this leader that you may possibly think is a high life, it's like any position, any career. You have to start from scratch, the bottom. And I would say 3 months to 6 months, get really good at building relationships with people, because they're going to open doors more than any amount of money that you've got.
It's easy to see from what you've achieved that there's been a lot of highlights. Would it be equally fair to say that there's also been a lot of disappointments on the journey?
A lot. A lot. Yeah. The big ones were initially, it was like when you have got a goal and you want to make an impact, you reach out to these organizations that are doing things as well, and you get a lot of no's, you get a lot of doors that are shut in your face. Obviously, when you're dealing with public figures and the way that I was doing it, again, you get a lot of no's. You get people that want to come on. They wouldn't want to invest into you. They'd want to collaborate because they'd see the reach and they'd see the celebrities and they knew that it could benefit them. However, when you change those conversations around, and it was like, well, you can become a sponsor or you can invest so we can actually further our efforts, then they go quiet. So again, it's constantly an internal battle. But the way that I look at it now is if you can get through those and you can keep putting one foot in front of the other, you become better. You become better in spotting in people. I always say in business, it's funny because it's true. The hardest thing in business is not actually learning business. It's learning about people.
My wife said to me recently, she said, husband, she says, you're right. And it's very rare that my wife will say I'm right. So when she says I'm right, I'm very happy to hear those words. I said to her once, I said, sweetheart, if a successful person rejects me, I never take it personally. But when an unsuccessful person rejects me, I said it's the most hurtful thing I experience.
Yeah.
And she laughed it off, and I watch her today. She's a champion when it comes to making sales, and she's developed that thick skin now, and she's had so much rejection over the years that she says to people up front, hey, I'm just going to be really honest with you. If this program is for you, I would like you to come and join me. But if it's not for you, don't tell me a story. Don't tell me a lie. Don't try to let me down slowly.
Yeah.
Just tell me it's not for you. And people look at her, and she's a tiger mama, and they go, and they go, it's not for me. She goes, thank you so much. That's fine. That's all I need to know. And one of the things that I want to highlight here is for all of us to make an impact, whether it be a local or a global impact, we've got to learn to deal with those disappointments. And I think it's also a prerequisite of success. If we go into it blind like I was when I was an Australian champion athlete, I thought I was going to rock up because of my personality, because who I was, because I used law of attraction and I had affirmations. I was going to win the Australian championships the first year.
Yeah.
But life taught me a very good lesson. And 9 years later, I still hadn't achieved that goal. But what I did find through those 9 years of learning about myself, learning about my body, once I did get it, I cherished it so much. And I still have those great experiences today. Okay, it happened when I was 26, but I'm just so proud of that because it was the person that I became on that journey. And those talents, those skills, those characteristics, those personality traits that were developed, even the perfectionism. Now, I think a lot of people struggle with perfectionism. Perfectionism has two sides of the scale. It can help you or it can hurt you. You just got to learn how to balance it. And for many years, I was struggling with perfectionism until I went, oh my gosh, it's actually helped me because I've actually learned to master something. Now, your impact, you've gone global, you've done it under 12 months. And if you could simplify this, and of course, we know it takes a long time to develop the secret sauce. If you could boil it down to three simple things, what were the three things that you had to do to have a global impact in under 12 months? And keeping in mind doing it with zero budget. What were those three things that you did?
I'd say the main thing is relationship building. You really need to get good at that. And out of that, stepping into your truth. This perfectionism, this control that we try to always have, like you say, you can utilize it for the good, but the hindrance behind that is if you're trying to control everything, the outcome, it's going to really screw you up when you're building relationships with people. And it depends who you're trying to build relationships with. When it comes to the second no, impacts, how can you be seen? So if you're carrying baggage from you that you're so scared in fear and judgment, you need to work through those trigger points first, because if you want to make an impact, you need to be willing to get yourself on camera. You need to be willing to shake things up a little bit. And that's why I always say with IPC, it's about challenging or changing the narrative around mental health, because changing and challenging is outside the box compared to, oh, let's just keep doing the same thing over because clearly everything's working. Well, it's not, is it? So we're challenging the narrative. So you need to be willing to put yourself out there. And the third thing I would literally say is, and again, it sounds cliche, is it is a test of the impact, but get deep on uncovering who you are. If you don't go deep on yourself, you are never, and this is truthful and honest, you are never going to become that person who's going to create an impact, because the only person that can do it is you. And if you have got so much shit piled on top of you, and I always put it like this. So really quickly, a little story, you might have heard it, you might have not, but think about years and years ago, there was a Thai monastery and there was golden monks everywhere. And what they basically did, there was a war coming and they covered a couple of the golden monks with tar, with wood, with mud, so that it wouldn't obviously get stolen. Most of them got stolen except this one that they forgot about. Years later, they was building a new road through, and basically one night there was a storm and one of the monks had gone out and he saw this glimmer of gold that was coming from this mud heap. So he was like, okay, the next day, went back out, went with a couple of the monks, they started chipping away, and then they uncovered this golden Buddha. Now, the idea of the golden Buddha, and I always attest it to IPC, is if you can chip away at all those external layers and validation and experience and crap that we pile on top of ourselves, we are the golden Buddha that can make an impact in this world. And it doesn't matter whether it's one person that creates a ripple effect. People are always watching. And I'll say the last one is consistency. If you are consistent with anything, even if it's not making you money at the beginning, you don't know where it's gone. I did a post today and somebody brought a conversation up and said, did you actually realize that Robbie Williams, Take That, back in the day, is following the campaign? And I was like, no, I didn't. So that prompted me to actually go into the followers on the campaign page. There was Olympians, there was gold medalists, there was some of the world's biggest public speakers, there were celebrities that I grew up in the UK watching, and they were all following it. And I'm like, holy crap. So you just don't know who's watching. So keep putting one foot in front of the other and don't overcomplicate it.
I love it. Number one, relationships. Number two, you got to have your truth. Number three, you got to go deep in yourself. And then four, to have that consistency. And it is interesting what happens with consistency. I learned many years ago that it takes about 95% of your mental energy just to begin. And we have a lot of false starts. We think we've started, but we really haven't. But you can start to see that snowball effect, and it starts to build momentum. And the most fascinating thing is once you get momentum, you only need about 5% of your energy to continue. And I know after being in my business for a decade or more, in the first 7 or 8 years, it took me every bit of energy I had to fight those inner battles, to make sure that I didn't go back to the old job. So I didn't give up on the dream. But now it takes so little energy to keep it moving. But because you got all your energy back, you can start to put more in. And it does have that ripple effect. I remember my mentor, he said, Daniel, at my first training, I had 3 people in there. And I thought, well, I'm going to have 33 in my first one. And one person showed up to my first training. And I felt disappointed. But, going back to what you're saying here, comparing, competing, and judging. He was starting from a totally different place. And I had 1, and then I had 2, and I had 3. And then one day I woke up and I had more people in my training than my mentor did. Yeah. But instead of judging, I had so much joy because I realized at that stage he had actually paved the way and I was standing on the shoulders of giants. But good things do take time. So let's summarize this, ladies and gentlemen. Be careful. Comparing, competing, and judging. You've got to be mindful of those. And if you want to have that global impact, you've really got to start by becoming a relationship expert. You've got to start to build those relationships. You've got to figure out who you are. And you've got to be true to who you are. The word unique is singular. There's no uniquer. There's no uniquing. There's no unique-est. There's only unique, which means you're one of a kind. And there's a 50 billion to 1 chance that anybody else will be like you. So you've got to embrace who you are. Thirdly, you've got to go deep. And it's like a generalist. And you mentioned this at the start of the conversation. You went to the general practitioner. But you've got to become a specialist in what you do. You've got to go in. You've got to understand yourself. But you've also got to understand that change you want to make. And then fourthly, you just got to keep showing up. It's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of disappointment along the way, but you just got to show up consistently day in, day out. And just like Glenn, you'll wake up one day and Robbie Williams is going to be following you too. Just what an awesome compliment to have such a well-known person supporting what you do. I think that's just incredible. Now, I want to share your website here, and I want to direct our followers over to here. So if we go to your website, what can we learn from your website, and how can we connect with you on your website?
Yeah, so obviously there you can see I lead by my imperfections. I talk about being the world's best imperfectly perfect mentor, because unless we learn to embrace and become who we want to be, which is what I do when I do mentoring, and I also actually offer a group mentoring session whereby people can pay a smaller price, because I talk about being resourceful. Some people don't have those resources to be spending a lot of money one-to-one. So I actually do, as you can see now, is I show people how they can become game changers, and I walk through the process. I go live twice a week with them. They get to be part of a support network. And this is one of the things, I only bring people in who will clap the loudest for other people, because it's essential that if you want to do it, you do want to collaborate with others, you do want to network, but there is this thing about competing, comparing, judging. Again, it brings back to learning how to decipher and have the discernment of who wants to collaborate to help you and who just wants to utilize your platform for that. So luckily I've gone through those lessons like yourself, and you can enable people and go, this is what you watch out for, and there are sheep in wolf's clothing, but you've not to become cynical as well. So yeah, I do mentoring, I do the group thing, and also one of the bigger things with IPC, I'll just say, is that what we've done is we've got an accumulative community podcast whereby there are a lot of people wanting to make an impact. So we created a book called the Pay It Forward Notes to My Younger Self series. With that, you get a 12-week process with our in-house positive psychologist who actually works through these trigger points with you. You get to be part of a best-selling book because we've already had 3 volumes out. And that also has some of our celebrity authors in. So you're going to get on a world stage. We've got press lined up, all of it. And that's an ongoing thing. We're on volume 4. We've got like 2 spots left. But then volume 5 will start in February, whereby you actually work with a positive psychologist. You get to be a part of a book. You get to share your story to make an impact in the world on a bigger scale than you would trying to start from zero. So when people say, so do you want people to go to the book or you're mentoring? I'm like, look, to be honest with you, for me, I'm fine. But I would say essentially, if you want to create an impact, there is a book there with celebrities, with press. It's going to give you leverage quick. And that's one of the things I would say to people, you need to learn how to leverage things if you want to create impact.
Well, was it Archimedes who said, give me a lever long enough and I can leverage the world?
Yeah.
You gotta learn to leverage. And if you want to have an impact, and if you want to impact millions of lives, you can't do it one-to-one anymore. You got to do it one to many. I know I want to impact 1 million lives in my lifetime, but it's going to take a lot of help. I can't do it by myself. If I want to impact 10 people, I can do that. But my life would come to an end pretty soon. It'd be nothing to work hard towards.
But it's why the age-old thing, and I'm not for it. I did it in the past when I was younger, and you fall for it. The network marketing. There are a reason why they're so successful, because they create and leverage community. Even if you don't like their products, you go to an event with network marketing, it is like a concert, and everyone's loving each other and everyone's wanting to see people succeed. And I had to change my thought process around that, because I went with old narratives and going, oh, I was part of something back in the younger days in fitness, and it was this pyramid thing and I'm not in one, but what I'm saying is essentially network marketing is the baseline of impact. It's creating a mass exposure to become a leader in whatever you want to do. You
got to have a system, and I believe that type of system. I know multiple 7-figure earners in the network marketing space. And again, going back to the number one thing you got to do to have a global impact is they were able to create relationships. Yeah. And those relationships they could scale. Ladies and gentlemen, what I want you to do is I want you to jump on Glenn's website now, glennmarsden.com. Make sure you check out the good work that he's doing there at IPC Global. And if you want to be a part of a community that changes lives and has an impact, check out what he's doing. Check out the mentorship programming. And if one of your dreams is to write a book, don't try to do it all yourself. Do it with somebody who's done it already and get your name associated with the greats. And I know you've got people like Les Brown talking about you. I think if you've been in personal development for the last couple of years, you would know who Les Brown is, and get into a book with his name. Be perfect for you. Glenn, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to hear the early beginnings, to learn about some of the disappointments that you've had to go through to be able to have this big impact and change so many lives. It's a credit to your determination, and I can imagine in the years ahead just how big this is going to be and the size of the impact that you'll have. So, ladies and gentlemen, go to glennmarsden.com. The link will be in the show notes below, and we'll see you soon. Have a wonderful day.